Hello again, fight fans. Welcome to our fifth and final video from our interview with Dr. Margaret Goodman, founder of the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association, or VADA. In this last section, we talk about what happens when there is a positive test, what the process is around that. We also talk about the future of drug testing in boxing, what could be done to make it better, particularly related to fighters cutting weight. That seems to be one of the biggest issues, and not just in boxing, but in other martial arts like MMA. That's a huge, huge issue. The WBC's already signed on with their clean boxing program. We talk about in this section, Margaret does, about how the WBA might be next. And if we can get the WBA involved, then we're halfway there. We only got 2 more to go. So this is the last part with our interview with Dr. Margaret Goodman. I hope you all enjoy it. Let me know what you think, guys. Comment, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And as always, thank you so much for your support. So from a legal standpoint, I see where there's a protection there where you guys have to have all your ducks in a row before you can even report the result. And that's all you do. And that's another thing I think fans are confused about. Yeah. You don't dictate what happens after that. No. That's up to the sanctioning organization or the commission or whatever. You just report the results.
And I think that's important because who adjudicates results for fights anyway? It's really the commission that really has that responsibility. And so that's why one thing that we do, one thing that I think is very important is the transparency aspect. So that's why our results are shared with all of those bodies that could potentially adjudicate something. For example, it's common knowledge right now we're testing Golovkin and Danny Jacobs. So we referred those results. I'm not speaking out of turn. We don't release results to the public, but I saw Mauricio Suleiman, because it's a WBC fight, said that those fighters had been tested. And so when we give results, we send a letter. So then what I do is send a letter, even if the results are negative, because it's just as important to know you're negative as it is to know that you've got an adverse finding, is I send a letter to the fighter. I email it to them and their representatives. It may be their manager or their lawyer, whoever it is. And then we also send another letter with those exact same results to the commission, to the sanctioning body, if a sanctioning body is involved, to the fighter's promoter, to the Association of Boxing Commissions, and Fight Facts, so that nothing could be brushed under any rug, or under the grass, since we're sitting out here in the grass, because everyone knows everything when we know it.
I love that. The complete transparency through the whole process. Everyone has the same information, and you're very accessible to the fighters. I know Dr. Silva was talking with me before about how a lot of fighters will email questions or they'll want to know things, and you guys are very open. And now the WBC is working with their clean boxing program. They're using VADA. How can we get the other sanctioning organizations to jump on here? How can we get this thing going bigger?
Well, I think that would create a huge important step into uniformity of the sport, and not just with anti-doping. It would get everybody on the same level playing field. We've had some talks with the WBA. I think they're going to institute their own program, which I think is terrific. It takes a while. I mean, I can tell you, I can't remember what year. It would be the first year I gave a talk about performance-enhancing drugs. This is before even VADA, maybe 10, 12 years ago, before the ABC. And still, probably 80% of the commissions in the United States don't do any drug testing except for marijuana, narcotics, and stimulants, if they do that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's just terrible. It's not fair. And, when this is such a dangerous sport with the inherent dangers that it has, it's not right to stay in that old-fashioned frame of mind.
Seems boxing can move very, very slowly
sometimes. Slowly, and I get that.
It progresses, but very, very slowly. I've noticed that.
Can I tell you one other thing that VADA does that most organizations don't have to do? Because we are we don't adjudicate results. We're not like UCAD or USADA. Anytime we have an adverse finding, we have to report back to the lab what happened, because you don't want anybody gaming the system. You want all that transparency too. So we always let the laboratory know what happened, how it was adjudicated by the commission or the sanctioning body. Sometimes it's in the media, so everyone knows anyway.
Right.
But that's a restriction in a way that we have, but it helps put everything out there so that everyone has that information.
Other groups aren't doing that, because I could name a bunch of cases where a fighter was caught. There was supposed to be a hearing didn't happen. They're just, things aren't getting reported to the opponent right away, all kinds of cases. Well, what could be, other than 365-day testing, which of course would require a very big budget from some of the sanctioning bodies, or just the fighter putting up the money themselves, what are some ways, what are some things we could do right now to improve the drug testing in boxing?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I think probably most importantly is that when fighters are drug tested, they need to be tested for the things that they're using, not for the things that they're not. I mean, one reason why we eliminated marijuana was, for some of the reasons that Dr. Silva talked about, is that it's becoming legal in so many areas. But not just that, we don't really believe it to be a performance-enhancing drug.
It doesn't really speed you up.
Well, it's not just that. It's, to me, alcohol is worse for a fighter. I don't want to sound like a teetotaler here, but alcohol is worse for a fighter than many things. And many things even on a prohibited list, and we don't test for alcohol. So, I try to think of marijuana in that way, and I think that it's too bad that commissions focus on that too much, not just in boxing and MMA, it's also in other professional sports like football, that they need to concentrate on the things that are really contributing to an unlevel playing field. And so, yes, stimulants are important, narcotics are important, but performance-enhancing drugs like anabolic steroids and blood doping is important. And so commissions, if anything, in a step-by-step way in improving things, they need to add those substances. They need to only use WADA accredited laboratories, and that's another thing that can be done very easily. These laboratories, and I've talked to them, are willing to help them with their budget. And it's like anything, cost and demand. If you can test a whole bunch of athletes as opposed to just a couple, the costs can go down. And so these laboratories will often work with commissions to lower the cost on the testing panel if there's large numbers of athletes. So to me, there's no reason why an athletic commission, at least I can talk about the United States, in the US should not do that type of level of testing. So WADA accredited labs improve their panels. And yes, out of competition testing is important, but I get the issues of that. So that if a commission needs to rely on third parties working maybe with a sanctioning body that may have that budget to contribute, then they should do that. They should look at creating their own policies and procedures. It's not enough. I see so many commissions going, well, we use the WADA list. They don't use the WADA list. They don't, because they don't test for those things. They can say these are prohibited, but they're not testing for them.
What do you say to fans, and I get this a lot, and from media, that say, they're all doping anyway. Just let them dope, just because they're all doing it anyway. What do you say to that?
I mean, I get that perspective. I do. But is that fair when someone's risking their life?
Well, you've seen some of the results firsthand, looking at, evaluating fighters over the years. You've seen some of the results. This sport can, be very damaging.
The ravages of it are terrible. And I don't want to see boxing go away. I don't think that that's a possibility, but I don't want to see the same kind of statistics that we're seeing in football as far as brain injuries. And what relationship do performance-enhancing drugs have to that? I bet they have a strong relationship to them. And so what do you want to do when you watch a fight? You want each fighter to have the equal chance of winning. That's why you don't want one fighter going into a fight with a brain injury as opposed to the other fighter. That's not fair. So is it fair that they go in with one fighter using these performance-enhancing drugs and the other fighter may not have as good a guru behind him telling him what to use? And what are the risks of those drugs? Do we want fighters placing themselves at more risk? And so that's why performance-enhancing drugs can't be allowed, because of the risk of this sport. Maybe you could think about some argument in baseball or one of these other sports, although there can be injuries in baseball as well. But to me, there's no way you could think that should be possible in professional boxing.
Real quick on the whole half-lifing thing and the microdosing thing, do you see that as a growing problem as the testing is getting better and you guys are able to catch trace elements? Are there more fighters athletes in general trying to do the microdosing and the half, timing things for competition testing, or is that something that is pretty much standard? It's always the same. It's always been.
I don't know. I mean, I try to keep myself separate from any of that because really we're just trying to administer a program. But I think that I think it goes on a lot. How much, I don't know. But once again, I never used to think the boxers use performance-enhancing drugs as much as MMA fighters, and I think it's probably close to being equal. But maybe it's different substances depending on the type of competition they're involved in. But I think that one other important thing that I think needs to change is weight cutting. And you mentioned that yourself. Weight cutting is a real problem, and that's always been a problem in the sport. And I think that fighters not going into camp or staying in shape throughout the year, they don't understand that that's so important, that this is a job that's a year-round job,
right,
not just when you're going to camp. And so I think that the more and it may not be a way for commissions to do that, but I think that fighters understanding the ballooning up and down in weight and not fighting at the right weight are going to contribute to brain injuries. They're going to contribute to looking for other ways to make themselves lose weight. That leads to performance-enhancing drugs. It leads to more brain injuries. It leads to all of the other things. It's kind of a downward spiral. So I think that one thing that California has done, changing the timing of the weigh-in, although I personally would like to see serial weigh-ins, including one the day of the fight, so that a fighter's only allowed to gain a certain percentage. That's a whole other story.
I was going to ask you about that, because the IBF is one sanctioning body that has a certain limit. Do you think they should all do that? Do you support a rehydration limit for fighters?
Yeah, I do, and I think that the WBC has that program where they have a 30-day weigh-in.
Right.
I think all that's good, because I think fighters using camp as a fat farm, or fighters using camp to just take punches, to spar all the time, those things aren't good. And I think that needs to be dealt with. And I think that a lot of that starts in the amateurs. I think that young fighters, and I once gave a talk for amateur ring doctors in Colorado Springs, and I think that fighters that are amateurs that are coming up, they're often put in the wrong weight class. They have growing, developing bodies.
Right.
I would say there's huge percentages of fighters that have eating disorders. Just like you see in jockeys too, but I think especially in boxers, so many of them, they'll tell you they have an eating disorder.
I've seen it.
I mean,
yeah.
Why wouldn't they? They're torturing themselves to fit into a weight class where they don't belong, because someone has told them that they'll be stronger, and then they think in their mind that they will be stronger, and maybe in some instances they are. But look at all the amount of weight they put on between the weigh-in and the fight. And that was one, Dr. Homansky was actually one of the people that first argued with that got the weigh-in changed to the day before. But it's been so bastardized that it's become one of the most unhealthy things that happens to fighters. And there's all kinds of arguments why you can't do serial weigh-ins. But if we're really trying to improve the safety of the sport, that really needs to change and needs to happen.
I agree. Dr. Goodman, thank you so much.
My
I'm
pleasure.
going to shake
Thank
of
you.
a cold hand here. It's a little chilly
hand.
outside.
I know.
Thank you
Sorry
so
about
much
that.
for taking the time to talk with us.
My honor. Thank you for coming up and interviewing me. Don't get to do it too much.
And I had a good time meeting your horses out here. Pretty awesome.
They're great horses.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.